All right, we're live. GM, how's it going? I'm gonna wait, I'm gonna stall a couple seconds and wait for people to roll in, but I'm here. Well, first off, I'm Dino for anybody who's like new tuning in. We do these live streams once in a while. I'm one of the co-founders of Fluent, and today we're gonna explore EVMs and altVMs, the general execution design space in the Bitcoin ecosystem. We've spent like probably a lot of time talking about things in the modular eco. Like maybe you've like seen some of the modular media stuff in the past, or with Fluent, like specifically in like the Ethereum L2 ecosystem. But there's a lot of really cool stuff happening in the Bitcoin eco, and I know these two guys are at the forefront of some of that, and hopefully there's some good insights here. I'm sure there will be. But without further ado, yeah, let me just introduce Orkun from Citrea, and Ian from Bitcoin Layers. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having us, Dino.
Yeah, no, stoked to be here. Thanks for having us on.
Of course, of course. Do you guys want to just give like a quick introduction on you yourselves and what you're working on?
Sure,
Okay.
I can go ahead and
Yes,
be
go
quick
ahead.
because I'll go ahead and be quick because Orkins is a lot more exciting. Yeah, my name's Ian. Online, I go by Giannis. I work on a project called Bitcoin Layers. The TLDRs, we do like similar assessments to what L2B does for Ethereum L2s. We do those for kind of anything that claims to be a Bitcoin L2 sidechain, etc. So just working on that right now and reviewing the current kind of landscape of Bitcoin scaling solutions and supporting infra. So that's what I'm working on.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Orkun. I am co-founder of Citrea and the CEO of Chainway Labs. Citrea is Bitcoin's first ZK rollup that we have been building for around a year. I'm sure like Bitcoin L2 space is extremely exciting, and it's also a lot of projects that's coming to the space. We started building it last year. I think it was around June, July that we decided to fully focus to build on Citrea. And back then there was no other, I think, team publicly saying that they will build a Bitcoin ZK rollup. There were some teams that have been researching ZK on Bitcoin for years and individual researchers. But it was all side chains that has been around for years in Bitcoin. But yeah, last year we saw that with ordinals, these side chains never get traction, even though Bitcoin main chain had problems with scaling, especially under some loads like ordinals, minting, and BRC20s. But yeah, for the last 1 year we have been building. We recently released our devnets and now gearing towards testnet launch, which is coming very, very soon. Yeah, that's all about me and Citrea actually.
Right on. Like, Ian, I know you're coming from Espresso, and obviously I'm working on Fluent, which is more in like the modular Ethereum like ecosystem. Maybe we could just like walk down like memory lane for a second and like just like map out how that has gone over the past couple of years, because maybe we can then compare it and contrast to what you see happening in like the emerging Bitcoin L2 space.
Yeah, so this is like really funny. I actually in my like espresso interviews told obviously Jill Gunter, who was my boss, and then one of the other co-founders, his name's Charles. I was like, oh yeah, like I'm not really interested in doing any of this on Ethereum. Like I want to see if you can do it on Bitcoin because I'm like a closet Bitcoin maximalist. So I was like super inspired. For me, it kind of all took place, probably 3 years ago at this point, 2 or 3 years ago. Someone by the name of John Light, who's with Alpin Labs now, wrote a research report that was sponsored by the Human Rights Foundation and Starkware, essentially how you could do a validity rollup on top of Bitcoin. So that was kind of my interest, like all along, right? Figuring out how these systems could work on Bitcoin. People thought I was nuts. They thought I was crazy. But then you started seeing like maybe this was probably like a year ago, right? Like after the report came out, I think Light did a series of like podcasts explaining the idea. It was kind of like the first person, along with like a few others, namely Eric Wall, that were championing this idea. So maybe after a year after that report came out, the roll kit team in Celestia, I think actually ran a like sovereign roll up on Bitcoin. I think it was on one of the test nets. And that was kind of like the first, I think, demonstration of doing this on like a test net. And then Chainway was the first team, with who's now building Citria, was I think the first team to announce that they were building this type of system. So like when you look at kind of the evolution of it, it was, you had the original paper that was released in I think 2021, 22, and then there was like this championing of it for a year, kind of like a break in that. And then eventually, the Rollkit team, Chainway team, Citria team, started like actually developing like sovereign rollups on Bitcoin. And then a few months after that came the BitVM paper. And shortly after the BitVM paper was released, teams were starting to figure out how you could use this for like a trust minimized two-way peg. Again, I think Citria, along with a few others, were like the first teams to announce like how this could potentially work. So that I think was like the Cambrian explosion of like all this stuff. So it was like figuring out, was this even possible? Maybe it's possible. Using Bitcoin as a DA layer was the first step to like try to bring sovereign rollups. And then shortly after that, it was the Cambrian explosions of teams trying to build on this concept called BitVM. And yeah, so now that's why we have like this huge interest. There's probably I'd say there's over 100 projects that have announced their intention to do this, but I think it's more like 30 to 40 that are actually kind of in that realm of actually building something that works, independent if it has a relationship with Bitcoin or not. Like that's kind of like, I'd say the playing field right now. So yeah, there's a huge interest in the design space. Credit to Chainway and Citria for being like one of the first three teams to like start working on this and do it before the hype as well. So yeah, that's kind of like I'd say the historical background of it.
I remember when the Celestia guys with Rollkit released that blog post, and it just went like mega viral. And like at this point, I was paying no attention to the Bitcoin ecosystem. I was just like very heads down in modular land, and I'm like, holy shit, there's definitely like some interest or demand here, or something's going on. This has got like 1 to 2 million views or something crazy. And it was just simply like, it was literally just them posting data to Bitcoin. Like, damn. But okay, so like, let me contrast that with the kind of like Ethereum eco and how the L2s played out. And I mean, just the super quick version is like we sprouted up a bunch of EVM copy pastas, and I mean, there's reasons. I think there's decent reason why that happened, at least like in part because there was so much energy spent on writing like ZK circuits and making sure kind of like the proofs that could actually scale these things where possible. And like the most reasonable place to start was like with the EVM. It's like that's where all the apps are written, so that's where all the energy went. And then I think we probably got a little bit like too carried away because like but that's natural in a way. That's natural just because like the software was there, and so now it's open source, and so people just start like stamping it out. And I think now the like Ethereum ecosystem, modular ecosystem is saying, all right, well, you know what, like maybe it's time we can actually innovate on more on like on the execution layer, because there are like more things that devs want to do. And so that's kind of like the sentiment in like the Ethereum L2 ecosystem. I haven't, even though I'm building like a kind of altVM solution on the Ethereum ecosystem, I definitely see a lot of value in keeping something EVM compatible. And I don't think there needs to be like 1,000 of those necessarily, but I do see like the value in it. And so yeah, that's just a little bit what's happening like in the Ethereum ecosystem. But you mentioned BitVM as like an enabler of this on Bitcoin. So Orkun, do you want to just talk through that a little bit? We don't have to get too technical, but
yeah, of course. A bit on the EVM side of things, I think it's mainly a bit different than building an EVM L2 on Ethereum and EVM L2 on Bitcoin, because in a sense, like just most popular one is Arbitrum, right, currently. But what Arbitrum provides to Ethereum users is just faster and cheaper, but it's still EVM. So it is the same applications that you can see, the same deck sitting there, same lending protocol sitting there. But in Bitcoin, it is much different because now we are introducing EVM to a network where there's no VM at all. So EVM is quite boring for Ethereum people, but it is probably exciting for more Bitcoiner people. We saw our EVM like in Rootstock, for example, I think since 8 years from now, or even 9 years. But it was just like Ethereum for Bitcoin. It was a sidechain. But now we have ability to build this EVM system on Bitcoin. I think that's the value, and not just it's EVM. Obviously, all VMs are different than BitVM, so it's good for Bitcoin. Bitcoin VM, sorry. And yeah, getting back to BitVM. BitVM initially the paper was extremely, I think, tried to like get the idea very simple, but at the same time it was very complex. Because of that, I don't know how this happened. But the initial idea of Robin Linus was, okay, we cannot build full smart contracts on Bitcoin, but what if we can have a computation and we can just write this computation in gates instead of writing them in programming languages? Like in assembly, we can just represent them as circuits, not ZK circuits, just regular circuits built with NAND gates, AND gates, or whatever other gates. And we can put them into a tap script, which is the taproot, which is a script of Bitcoin, where you can put many scripts on chain with a just minimal footprints, which is the Merkle root of those scripts. And if necessary, we can play a series of challenge response games, and eventually we can decide that which script is executed incorrectly, so that we can slash the other party and reward the challenger, for example. And this idea evolved a lot during the time. It was called, right now, it's called BitVM 0. And then the BitVM 1 paper came out, which instead of suggests building RISC-V based scripts, instead of building gate-based scripts. And shortly after that, BitVM 2 idea came out, and it is much, much simpler than BitVM 1. And it's also very easy to execute compared to the BitVM 1 and 0. Because, okay, let's just skip the VM part and just build a ZK verifier script, which currently is the open source implementation, currently around 3 gigabytes or 2 gigabytes. But you cannot put that into a single block, right? So let's chunk the script and sign each input and output of each execution. And anyone can just put an on-chain transaction to challenge the operator, and it can just run the part of the script so that we can determine whether ZK proof is correct or not. And with ZK proof, we have unlimited computation, because especially with Starks, you just have unbounded computation. You can just put any computation you want in a recursive manner. And now those computation can actually be verified on Bitcoin. This is the core idea of BitVM 0, 1, and 2.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. And also really exciting. As far as like use cases go, actually, let's say use cases and devs, and just general demand, right? Like, are you seeing people come to Bitcoin and try to do, either build an L2 or build on an L2 from other ecosystems, or are these people who are like part of the core Bitcoin community that now have like extra expressivity, so now they want to do it? And then I guess same thing goes for applications and use cases themselves. Like, are some of these things being ported over from other ecosystems, or are they net new? I'm sure it's all across the board, but how should I think about it?
Janus, do you want to go there?
It's I think it's a little actually too early to tell, right? I think, a lot of the projects, for context, right? Like there's probably like 20 projects that are technically live right now. A number of these are like traditional kind of, projects that they're kind of known as side chains, right? So Rootstock has its like own kind of version of the EVM, and they've been around for maybe like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years at this point, maybe a little bit less than that. And kind of there was this crux in the development of all these things where they didn't see a ton of activity, and kind of, I would say, the idea behind that always was like, oh yeah, well, it's a federated bridge, right? There's like 5 to 9 parties or 11 to 15 that are kind of managing the multi-sig, where people are depositing funds, right? And locking that to mint new funds on the side chain. And there's obviously other performance benefits, right? So like side chains have slower block times and centralized sequencers, whatever. So like you have this like list of like 20 projects. And I'd say the majority of them are not quite yet what you would consider like an L2 or a rollup or a Validium of that sense. They're still kind of like for example, you have maybe just a federated sidechain, so like 21 validators, like kind of like operating in a federation model, or you have like potentially like a closed kind of federated like L1, blockchain where you're running like a version of like Polygon CDK that's rolling up to that blockchain, but like again, it's all permissioned and federated, kind of MPC protocols, multi-sig securing the funds. So it's like this very early stage where all the projects on mainnet are, I think, essentially right now, the biggest activity we're seeing is like liquid staking tokens and kind of like airdrop farming is like the biggest use case. There's another chain coming out to market soon that is essentially like, I would say kind of like essentially a copy of just like Bitcoin script with faster block times. And their kind of pitch is like, we're just going to make BRC20s and ordinals kind of like more performative, but still kind of in that very much sidechain family of chains. I'd say the newer stuff where it's a little bit more interesting in seeing what the type of developer mindshare is going to be is kind of the roll-up projects that are kind of being announced right now that might be coming out in like the next like 12 to 18 months. And also following like the current projects do have like roadmaps for like progressive decentralization or progressive like Bitcoin alignment more rather, right? So I think right now it's like really too early to tell. Like a great example is Bob. They're an OP stack rollup that's currently settling and using Ethereum for data availability, but they have like these Bitcoin atomic swap portals. Like the biggest use case that we're kind of seeing right now is actually, I think it's mainly the liquid staking tokens that are starting to come out. And I think also some applications that were formerly on like other Bitcoin sidechains like Rootstock are now like being deployed on Bob. So it's kind of like the same, I would say, developer mindshare. It's just increased the amount of people that are like, I would say, more intellectually interested. I think when a lot of the more exciting improvements like related to the trust minimized bridges or kind of like actual Bitcoin rollups coming to market, I think that will drive a lot more attention to developer mindshare. I think right now it's more of a thing that people are just watching and it's still kind of like a more niche community. I don't know if that's kind of like my vantage point right now.
Yeah, I definitely agree also. Like, I think we spoke this with you in maybe a year ago, that why not just build a like sidechain or build a rollup? Do users actually care about security? Do developers actually care about security? I spoke this a lot of times with many other people. I think, yeah, if you just build, let's say, a temporary solution, a sidechain or roll up on another chain, I don't think any solid developer will come here and build a payment payment app that will compete with Lightning, because why they will build that kind of solution on these less secure systems than even Lightning. So the idea here is what we try to achieve is build the most trust minimized version of a Bitcoin L2 that we can build. We don't call it Bitcoin L2, but I'm just calling it because everyone calling it. But just build a layer that inherits most of the security from Bitcoin as much as possible today without a soft fork, and let developers build anything with that VM. It might be a bit expensive, it might be a bit slow, but eventually you are getting the same level of security with Bitcoin, and you are providing more opportunities to developers to build applications that can provide actual utility for people, for the payments, for the lending borrowing, for the stable coins, and privacy, and a lot of other stuff.
I see. What do you said you don't call it Bitcoin L2s. Do you call it, I mean, I'm assuming Bitcoin layers is a core part of this and app name, but like your specific product, like, do you just call it a Bitcoin layer, or how do you think about Citrea?
It's a ZK rollup on Bitcoin.
Okay, got
sure.
Got it.
But the technical definition of L2 is users should have an ability to unilaterally exit their funds, which is like even most of the Ethereum rollups except Fuel and Dgate doesn't allow this because they have instant upgradability, for example. But in Bitcoin land, it is only, I think, Lightning today is live that can provide this guarantee. And other than that, there's always some kind of minimal trust involved. Some of them are big. Like if you are depositing to a federated sidechain, then you are trusting to a federation. If you are depositing to a real Bitcoin rollup with EVM-based bridge, you are just trusting one of N of the committee, which is trust minimized, this similar security model with optimistic rollups on Ethereum. But yeah, to be a real L2, we need some kind of soft fork. But it's extremely technical topic, and no one actually like care about this. I think literature discussion. I personally care, but it is just easier to call it a ZK rollup on Bitcoin because this is what it is, and it serves for its purpose. So I'm just going with it. But people calling it Bitcoin now too, so I'm fine with it as well.
Got it. You have any take on that, Ian? I this is like there's I'm smiling because like we have nonstop, just like even in the Ethereum modular like L2 ecosystem, there's just like this nonstop semantic debates over what things should be called, and I'm sure it's no different. But like, how do you see it?
Yeah, so I mean, I was in the thick of it, right, when we had a debate about
I know
this.
you were.
Like, Orkun, I don't know when the debate was, but the debate was, the debate was maybe like 8 months ago or 9. And it's kind of maybe happening again. Like we did a spaces this morning with also from Sims from Alpin Labs. I think kind of the way I've been describing these things as simply just roll-ups, like for me, the correct technical term is probably a sovereign ZK roll-up with an optimistic validating bridge, is like if you really want to get granular with it. The state transition function is, is kind of like a sovereign ZK rollup, whereas like the validating bridge for Bitcoin assets has like this optimistic one-event trust assumption. I think like most in the end, like we've kind of decided in our kind of position to not define these things. We just call them, like if it's a rollup and it posts, its transaction data and the latest state roots of Bitcoin, we just call it a rollup. And we usually preface if like it has a validating bridge, we'll say like a BitVM rollup is kind of what we've been calling it. Because it implies that most users, like if Bitcoin, for example, is the gas token, it implies that users will be trusting this bridge with that one event trust assumption by just calling it a BitVM rollup. And we've kind of used that as the term to be one, I guess, quote unquote neutral, but also like it's such a new design space. Like you can kind of call it like, yeah, I don't have a strong opinion on it, but that's what we've been calling it.
Got it. Yeah, no, I don't have a too strong of an opinion on like what things are called, but I do have a strong opinion on like that the discourse is important at the social layer, like, and so like to make sure like everybody's like on the same page of like what what terms are being used if they go hand in hand with pretty extreme trust assumptions.
I think the biggest issue right now, right, that I have, why I just call it roll-ups or call it maybe side chains or call it, we've been introducing like other terms potentially, right, is like there is this kind of push for improving and making upgrades to the L1, right? And like my kind of, I guess, issue might be with, teams launching with like these kind of federated sidechain models and calling it L2. It's like, well, if we already have L2s, then like, do we need to can we just ossify the L1, not make any changes and just kind of like go on with the day, right? I feel like the L2 definition is probably the one that I'm a little bit more sensitive towards, because it suggests that we're kind of in this finished state where Bitcoin can support like hundreds of L2s that are these style of like EVM style rollups, right? And I don't think that that's probably the correct way to look at it. I think there's obviously improvements that can be made that can support rollups, it can support BitVM and support other protocols as well. So I think the conversation should probably start shifting more towards that versus like saying that these things are like end state L2s. Yeah.
Orkun, I saw you unmuted for a second. Do you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I definitely agree.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Do you guys see any is there any pushback in and at this point in the Bitcoin community over kind of like L2s or even the use cases that people are ideating on or anything like that? I mean, there's always some pushback, but like how compare that to a mental model that I might have from 3 years ago, which, before I got deeper into modular land.
Yeah, in general, it is very hard to like convince Bitcoiners to something. That's why like we don't just get into this like marketing tricks like calling it a like L2 marketing it as it's not like it is. We just call it this is the curl on Bitcoin. These are the risks, these are the guarantees, these are the trust assumptions. So if you want to use it, just come and use it. We don't, it's permissionless, so you can just use it if you like it. So this is how we just talk about the train in general in conferences, in online, in Discord, in private chats. But obviously there are a lot of projects like claiming more than they are. And that's also starting a bit pushback in the Bitcoin community, because in past there was a lot of like quote unquote attacks on Bitcoin, like block size, and then the wars with OP return, and then the ordinals came, and now people are building layers and calling it an L2, building a sidechain and calling it a trustless. So this is obviously like people are allergic to that, and they have a right to like just resist against it. So we are fine with it. But we don't try to like convince others, or like we don't try to push something. We just want to build use cases, and if that's useful for people, they will eventually use it. But if there is no use case, if this is just marketing, that's just push to the community, then eventually those products will die.
Yeah, I think the rough thing, right, is like you look at kind of what's been shipped, right? And I'd say the majority of chains that are in production accepting user deposits today are forks of Geth. So just like a standard fork of Geth, forks of the OP stack, forks of Polygon CDK, settling to like a variety of different kind of EVM style, EVM, you know, like permission layer one chains that they're just running themselves. So there's a lot of trust assumptions involved. Like we don't really know who the signers of like the multi-sig wallets are. We don't know the identities of the validators. Like if it's a permission setup, typically you're kind of basing it on reputational security for these people to not steal funds. And a lot of the identities for these like systems are not like public, or they're kind of tucked away in some like blog post that was posted maybe like 11 months ago that most people haven't seen. A lot of projects are launching with tokens like immediately. There's kind of, yeah, it's just like this very weird moment where there probably is some discourse to be had on like, oh, like how can validiums or like validity rollups or like plasma style chains like improve Bitcoin. But I think right now the discourse is like, it's settling down now. It's not as crazy as it was like 3, 4, 5 months ago. But I think a lot of people are kind of immune to these new developments because of the way that a lot of things launched. Like if you look at, for example, someone who's kind of been involved in Bitcoin for a long time, at the Bitcoin conference, like did this mega thread on like all these new L2 projects and just was basically like shitting on them and being like, this is absolute nonsense. It's kind of a scam. It was very funny. It was like really, really funny. It was said jokingly, right? And then a few days ago, there was a report released basically outlining, you know, what soft fork proposals or what covenants proposals could improve L2s. And there is a subset of that could like support, you know, projects like Citrea or projects like Alpin, et cetera, and even Starkware. And it was kind of, I would say, glossed over a bit. And I think the reason because of that was because a lot of this space is not like matured enough yet, and people are kind of looking at it as like this is kind of just like a one-time scam type thing. That's kind of the reaction that some of the community might have. So I think like it is going to take a little bit longer, but there are some like really cool projects, and I think a lot of those conversations are definitely going to start happening. But I think like what Orkin said, right? I think a lot of people are kind of very, very skeptical of what's going on. The trust is with regards to not just the trust assumptions, but the way people are kind of marketing it.
Yeah, unfortunately not surprised. I feel like that's in all these ecosystems, I feel like there's very quick abuse when something starts like working, or like when there's a good idea, and it's like kind of hard to parse through. And I'm sure, I mean, what solves that is obviously like useful applications and users and stuff. So we press on. But let's talk about EVM and altVMs more. Let's dig into that. Like from your guys' vantage point, like maybe we can frame it in terms of use cases, or like, I guess maybe I'll start with Orkin. Like how do you think about you know, EVM versus what I'll call altVM chains?
Yeah. Do I have time to tell a bit story?
Of course. Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
if you guys got to call this within the next, you know, whatever half hour, like
Okay. Yeah.
just
Thank you.
go ahead. But we got time.
Yeah. So initially, we started this idea by, okay, we realized people are ascribing some data to Bitcoin, and it's essentially JPEGs and text data to create tokens. And we started ideating, okay, instead of inscribing tokens and images, what if we can inscribe encoded operations like mint operation, like swap operation, and put some data next to it. And we can just get those data on client side and evaluate it within some deterministic function, and everyone can arrive to the same state. And our initial idea was, okay, let's build a DeFi application because people have these tokens and they want to swap it, but they rely on weird mechanisms to even do swaps. So we started working on this idea, not working, but started researching more. I said, okay, the UX is still pretty terrible because you have to wait 10 minutes for a transaction, and then you have to pay a lot of fees to send a Bitcoin transaction. You have to open a Bitcoin wallet, which generally has bad UX. And okay, we said, let's batch these operations together and ZK proof them so that we can have more transactions within the same block, and they can do a lot of things in between. And we just inscribe a summary of them. And this was essentially, after working on this idea for a month or two, we realized we are just reinventing building a rollup on Bitcoin, because the idea was essentially the same. And we just started from the most atomic way and just ended up building a ZK rollup on Bitcoin without the intention. The intention was providing utility, and the idea ended up with building a rollup on Bitcoin. And okay, let's build a, let's say, DEX rollup. But people now have to use their tokens or BTC to bridge to this system to just do a swap, which is not very efficient. And the idea was, okay, let's build a full VM then. And people can do whatever applications they want. So once they bridge, they can use variety of other projects instead of just doing swaps. And while researching VMs, we obviously developed a lot of EVM applications in the past. So we were extremely familiar. And we are introducing this VM to Bitcoin. So let's go with the most easiest one possible, because now we have two challenges. One is building this on Bitcoin and encouraging community to use this VM and develop on this VM. And the second thing was encouraging developers to build on this specific VM, the existing developers. If we would go with, let's say, Solana VM, then we would have a much more harder time to reach a developer audience who is both willing to build on Bitcoin and also willing to build on Solana VM. So EVM was a very easy choice for us because we believe there's a lot of developers who is excited about Bitcoin in Ethereum and EVM world, and we can just get them build something real here. But obviously, this is not the end goal. Our goal is introduce a multi-VM execution environments where there will be other VMs supported. Our code base is fully open source, and it's Apache 2 license, so you can just view it. It's all in the modules. So we have a specific EVM module that's in the same folder. You can just open a folder called SVM, and by specifying your progress in some interface, you can just embed Solana VM into this module, and these two modules will be naturally interoperable because they are living in the same blockchain. So we are building the Node software in that way, but shout out to Sovereign SDK, which we forked from their early version. So this is much their development, I can say. But we just built a full VM inside their modules and tweaked the software a lot since then. But this was their initial idea by building modules and making them interoperable. So yeah, the end goal is introduce multi-VMs, starting with WebAssembly and then going with Solana VM. So that we can reach to more developers to build Bitcoin applications. And they don't have to fragment the liquidity. They don't have to go to other chains. But in the short term, yes, we are building a EVM layer, and people can build L3s with custom execution environments. But they can still use Bitcoin DA even if they want to use other data availability layers. It's also available. But if they want to have same level of security, they can build an L3 with Bitcoin DA and run an SVM there, so that they can have the same security guarantees, but Solana VM.
Super interesting. Obviously, we're of a similar mindset, at Fluent. Just the fact that there's I'll call it go-to-market or ecosystem, whatever benefits, tooling benefits of EVM. You kind of have to meet the market where it is to some respect, but also want to design the system where it's forward-looking. And so that's why we're doing this blended execution design, where the base is reduced WebAssembly, and with that we're simulating different environments, kind of actually similar to what you mentioned, starting with Wasm EVM and SVM apps, like, and tailoring most of that experience towards EVM tooling and infrastructure, so people can like come in. And I mean, if you're an SVM developer, you might want to deploy on to tap into EVM wallet users, and obviously, if you're like an EVM wallet user, you might want to access other popular apps, either net new ones that we call blended apps that are making use of kind of like Rust and Solidity or languages from different VM ecosystems, or or just like tap into like a Solana app, and maybe like the Solana app is composing with an EVM app, and but you don't want to have to like switch wallets to accomplish that. So like we're definitely like in a very similar philosophy as you guys, of like, okay, let's meet the market where it is, but also kind of like design with a forward looking
Yeah,
lens.
exactly.
I'm curious because like I hear you mention well, I guess we could talk more about the implementation stuff like that offline. I'm very curious how you guys are approaching it. The way, and so some of this gets nuanced and probably too technical for what we want to dive into right now, but like at the high level, like we call what we're doing like blended execution, because it's really one VM. We're like, okay, that's not multi VM. We've got this like one WASM VM, and we're just like using precompiles, like super low level system contracts to like simulate the standards from different VMs. And so and we want to, one like very core design principle is to make it so all the contracts for everything that we support can talk to each other directly, and so all of that's like super seamless to developers. I'm curious, like, is that what you guys have in mind as well, building forward? And I mean, we obviously don't have to get like too into the details there, but I'm curious if you're doing something that looks more like that blended approach, or if you are like taking multiple different VMs and putting them in the same execution environment and just making sure the two state machines are mapped.
Yeah, so in our like just naive design is a bit like not like blended, I can say. It's not blended VM, it's like a multi VM, more likely. But we have also like plans to introduce other precompiles to make them work seamless, and also on the account level, we want to keep all the accounts in the same context. In this case, account abstracted EVM, for example. But we just want to make programs to work on VMs, especially contracts, so that people don't have to switch their wallets. We plan to create some set of precompiles that allow cross calls between VMs within the same interface. But it is still like an R&D and not a priority to VMs before keeping the mainnet and decentralized sequencers, and then that will be the main priority.
That's awesome. Like fully like, whether it's like the blended approach, I mean, all of this, the terminology is like sometimes like tricky and nuanced, whether multi VM, whatever. If you're expanding like the design space of what people can build like an execution environments with like Ethereum or near Bitcoin grade security, like I'm jacked up to hear that. And like um Ian, I'm curious through your lens. I want to get you to comment on some of the EVM versus like alt VM thing, just to put it like dramatically. But what do you think? Should there just be all alt VMs, all EVMs? Do you see it based on the use case? How do you think about it?
Yeah, I think it's, my perspective is like a lot more high level, right? Like it's thinking like, okay, if I build this EVM style rollup, right? Like what is the differentiator between this system and then let's say using like a wrapped version of Bitcoin, like TBTC, for example, on Arbitrum? It's like I've been saying TBT on Arbitrum for like, for like 6 months at this point, because I think it's a really good example, right? Like you can have the performance benefits of like the centralized sequencer, the synthetic of the Bitcoin synthetic is like being guarded by this like really big multi-sig. So the trust assumptions are actually quite similar to that of like current like in production Bitcoin kind of quote unquote L2s. So that's kind of like been my position, right? I think the caveat there is like what Orkin is describing is like, well, if we can make the security model like a lot more closer and aligned kind of with Bitcoin and inheriting Bitcoin security, and also inheriting security from like Bitcoin consensus participants, right? Like then we have a differentiator. Like then we have a differentiator where like, okay, right, like this chain is actually being kind of secured by Bitcoin. And additionally, if you can have like Bitcoin, for example, be the gas token, then like there's another differentiator. and you're kind of opening up a design space to another cohort of developers who may have not even ever built an Ethereum, right? Or maybe they're kind of like just been building on Ethereum or other ecosystems because that's where like the developer mind share is, but they're maybe more intellectually and philosophically aligned with Bitcoin.
Right.
So I think that's like a decent point. I think the other thing though is like there's already like 4 to 5 like not only just the roll up teams like the Botanics, who's kind of designed this new type of proof of stake sidechain system. They're building on the EVM as well, like super talented. So like you already have, I'd say like 4 to 5 to 6 really, really strong teams developing these like roll up and sidechain systems with the EVM. So I'd say like that's why we're starting to see like a couple teams have launched with the SVM. Like there's a team called Nexio that's building with the MoveVM. Root Network's building with the MoveVM as well. So we're already starting to see kind of that differentiation just because I don't think there's much of a market right now for the EVM teams because the teams building in it are already really strong.
Do you, or do you see it a similar way? Or do you have a different perspective?
No, I think Jens put it right. Yeah.
Gotcha. Nice. How do you guys think about and we can gear up to wrap pretty soon. I want to I know we'll come up on the hour before we know it. But as far as like use cases, I know it's early days, like you guys are saying, like some of this tech is still being like, solidified, built out, and that makes complete sense. But from your guys' vantage points, like what are you guys most excited to see built on Bitcoin?
Personally, bit non-custodial banks on Bitcoin, where you can keep your funds as Bitcoin, but while sending, you can send them privately, and at the same time, you can automatically swap them to USDC, USDT, or Bitcoin-backed stablecoin, and send them to the merchant. But it will be fully non-custodial, and it will have the same level of security with Citra by just building inside of Citra. And the second other thing is a Bitcoin-backed stablecoin, but not actually a fiat-backed coin, like USD-backed coin, but more like a reflexor model, where you are creating an individual currency that's not pegged to anything, but it's inherently stable against other currencies in the world, but it is backed by Bitcoin, so that it can be very easily used in payments. Because most people fear to like use Bitcoin in payments because it's fluctuating, even though it's the less volatile cryptocurrency. Or like arguably it is volatile compared to the USD or Euro. If you're like US citizens, volatile for you. But if you have this kind of stable coin, it is much less volatile than Bitcoin, but it is actually fully Bitcoin backed without an external dependency. So I think these two ideas are already cool. And there are some obviously teams working on Citrea, which targets some of them and also built on top of these ideas.
Love it. Ian, what do you think?
Yeah, I would probably agree with those points. I'm actually more personally interested in improved privacy. So I think there's some other systems that, for example, like are not rollups or not side chains that are being kind of researched and developed that offer a like more private form to like spend Bitcoin as a currency. That's kind of like my main interest. I think from like a go-to-market perspective, it seems that like what Orkin mentioned, like most teams thinking like throughout like, oh, how can we develop like Bitcoin-backed stable coins because there's a huge market there, borrowing and lending protocols. I think someone at the Bitcoin conference put it really well. Like, I don't think it's trying to reinvent the wheel or trying to reinvent new applications. It's just trying to like level the playing field with other ecosystems to have similar applications, but it be denominated in Bitcoin. So you're banking on Bitcoin being valued as a better money versus other ecosystems. And I think that's like a really interesting point because other than maybe like a Bitcoin backed stable, I think a lot of the applications that we'll see will be very similar as to what are in other ecosystems, but especially like kind of attracting developers from the EVM side of things. I am very interested though in the privacy systems that are being developed, namely something called ZK coins is something I'm really looking forward to.
Nice. No, it makes sense. I know you've always been we've talked offline about like, your admiration for like Zcash. I think you're a big Zcash user. So I had a feeling privacy was part of that story. Okay, cool. Well, we can get to wrap up. Like, is there anything else that you guys wanted to talk through? And if not, where can people find you? Like, feel free to throw some CTAs at them.
Yeah, I'll go first. You can follow me on Twitter at Janus, JANUSZG_. Also follow like the project we're working on at Bitcoin Layers. We try to like release like all these kind of assessments on the protocols coming to market and their various trust assumptions. Everything we do is also open source. So if you're interested in like contributing to research or contributing to our risk assessment frameworks and things of that nature, like just head to our GitHub and like submit a pull request or fork it or like or comment on an issue or something of that nature. Everything we do is open source under MIT. I'd say like if you're interested in kind of learning, diving into the ecosystem, I would reach out to teams like Satria and figure out where like open source kind of contributor opportunities are. And there's also some research like bounty funds. Like I know Starkware is kind of opening up $1 million fund to have kind of research and developers research kind of things related to the potential addition of something called OPCAT. So if you're interested in kind of learning how these different new opcodes could support things like rollups or L2s, et cetera, that's another really good place to go check out. There's a couple of like communities like Bitcoin Wildlife, the Bitcoin Layers Telegram channel, BitVM Builders. Those are some places to look and interact with people who are building on this stuff if you're interested from that side as well.
Love it.
Yep.
Orkan?
You can follow Citrea at Citrea_XYZ on Twitter. Are also full node sequencer and prover software is open source. Like I said, you can just contribute, and we are also hiring for a lot of roles that you can see on our webpage on chainway.xyz as well. And yeah, just contribute to Bitcoin Layers as well because it's an expanding ecosystem, and I know there are a lot of things to do. That's it's just like Reddit is just killing it. But obviously, it's our job to like improve the quality of the ecosystem to make it actually work and make it acceptable with as less drugs as possible. So yeah, these are my main things. And thank you for having me today. Yeah.
Of course, it was a blast. Yeah, thank you. Thank you both for coming on.
Of course, thanks, man.
Thanks.